The Galactic Unity Academy floated in the endless dark of space. A massive station called Harmony 7, where young aliens from dozens of worlds came to learn and grow together. It was a place of wonder and discovery, filled with students who had tentacles and wings and scales and forms that defied simple description. And among all these remarkable beings, there was one human woman who worked in the medical bay. A quiet presence that most students barely noticed at all. Her name was Yoon Seo-yeon, and she had served as the school nurse for 3 years now. She was middle-aged by human standards, with gray streaks in her black hair and gentle lines around her dark eyes. She moved through the medical bay with calm efficiency, always ready with a kind word and a steady hand. The students called her Nurse Yoon when they remembered to call her anything at all. On this particular morning, a young Velthary student named Kira L. crashed through the medical bay doors with her left wing bent at an awkward angle. The Velthary were elegant beings with iridescent wings and large silver eyes, and Kira L. was considered one of the most promising flight students in her year. But right now, she was just a teenager in pain, her wing throbbing from a bad landing during practice. "Let me see," Nurse Yoon said softly. Already moving to help the girl onto an examination table, Kirill hissed as the nurse gently extended her damaged wing. She had heard stories about humans, those strange, soft creatures from a world called Earth. They were new to the galactic community, barely a century into space travel, and most species considered them unremarkable at best. Fragile little beings with no claws, no venom, no natural armor. What could they possibly know about treating injuries? But Nurse Yoon's hands were surprisingly skilled. She applied a cooling gel to reduce the swelling and wrapped the wing with perfect precision. Her movements practiced and sure. "You will need to rest this wing for 3 days," the nurse said. "No flying until I clear you." "I know that is frustrating, but healing takes time." Kira Hell nodded reluctantly. She studied the human woman as she worked, noticing for the first time how Nurse Yoon always wore long sleeves, even though the medical bay was kept quite warm. The fabric covered her arms completely, right down to her wrists. "Thank you," Kira said, surprised to find that she meant it. Nurse Yoon smiled, a small, gentle expression that softened her whole face. "Come back tomorrow, and I will check your progress. And please, be more careful during practice." As Kira Hell left the medical bay, she passed a group of students gathered in the corridor. Among them was a large Droxan named Dexel, a hulking creature covered in thick gray plates of natural armor. He was laughing loudly about something. "Did you hear they are increasing security because of Kazrith threats?" One student asked nervously. "The Kazrith are cowards," Dexel declared. "They only attack easy targets. This station has nothing to fear." Another student gestured toward the medical bay. "Why do we even have a human working here? What can a human do if there is real trouble?" Dexal snorted. "Humans are soft. They break easily. I heard their planet is so gentle they actually survive falling down. Imagine being from a world so weak that falling does not kill you." The other students laughed, and Kira felt a strange twist in her stomach. Nurse Yoon had been kind to her. Was it fair to mock her species like this? She looked back at the medical bay and saw Nurse Yoon through the window, calmly organizing supplies. The human woman had obviously heard the laughter, but her expression never changed. She simply continued her work with the same quiet patience she always showed over the following days. Kira returned to the medical bay for her follow-up appointments. Each time, she found herself watching Nurse Yoon more carefully. There was something about the human woman that did not quite fit the stories. She had heard about the fragile Earth species. Nurse Yoon moved through her work with unusual awareness. Her eyes tracked movement constantly, always noting who entered and exited the medical bay. She had arranged all the furniture in strange ways. The desk faced the door. The supply cabinets never blocked her view of the entrance. and there was always a clear path between her and every exit. Nurse Yoon, Kirahel asked one afternoon, "How long have you been a nurse?" The woman paused in her work. "A long time. I trained as a medic when I was young, and I have been caring for others ever since." "A medic? Is that different from a nurse?" Something flickered in Nurse Yoon's eyes, something old and distant. "Medics work in difficult places. We go where people are hurt, and we help them survive. Nurses do the same thing, just in calmer settings." "What kind of difficult places?" Nurse Yoon was quiet for a long moment. "The kind of places I hope you never see." That night, Kirael could not sleep. Her wing had healed nicely, and she had been cleared to fly again, but her mind kept returning to the human nurse. There was a mystery there, something hidden beneath that calm exterior. She decided to return to the medical bay to thank Nurse Yoon properly, perhaps bring her some of the sweet nectar cakes that Volturi students loved. It was late, but she had seen lights on in the medical bay at all hours. The corridors were quiet as Kirael made her way through the station. When she reached the medical bay, the door was unlocked. She stepped inside and found Nurse Yoon asleep at her desk. Her head resting on her arm, Spiral hesitated. She should leave, let the woman rest. But as she turned to go, she noticed something that made her freeze. Nurse Yoon's sleeve had ridden up in her sleep, exposing her forearm. And what Kirael saw there made her hearts, both of them, skip a beat. The human's arm was covered in scars. Not the small marks of minor accidents, but terrible twisted tissue that spoke of violence beyond anything Kirael could imagine. They were burns, deep and cruel. There were gouges that looked like claw marks from some massive predator. And there, near the wrist, were the unmistakable marks of teeth, a bite wound that must have torn through muscle and nearly reached bone. Kirill stumbled backward, her wing knocking against a supply cart. The noise made Nurse Yoon stir, and Kirill fled before the woman could wake fully. She ran through the corridors with her mind racing. What had happened to the human nurse? What kind of nightmare had carved those marks into her flesh? And how was she still alive after wounds that would have killed most species? The students thought Yoon Seo-Yeon was just a quiet, unremarkable human, a soft creature from a soft world. But those scars told a different story entirely. Kirael could not forget what she had seen. Every time she closed her eyes, the image of those scars burned in her mind like a brand. Burned tissue layered over claw marks, bite wounds twisted into the flesh. What kind of hell had the quiet human nurse survived? For days, she found herself watching Nurse Yoon from a distance. She sat in the cafeteria where she could see the medical bay entrance. She lingered in corridors where the nurse might pass. She observed and wondered and tried to understand how such a gentle woman could carry such violent marks. She was not the only one thinking about humans lately. News had spread through the station that Kazarith raiding parties had been spotted in nearby systems. The Kazarith Dominion was a brutal faction known for attacking civilian targets. And students whispered fearfully about what might happen if they came to Harmony 7. "My father says the Kazarith are testing our defenses," a Leshan student named Vortek announced at lunch one day. His species had 4 arms and keen analytical minds, and Vortek loved to share his father's important government connections. He works in Galactic Intelligence, so he knows things. But he says we are safe. The Kazarith would never attack a school. What about the human nurse? Another student asked. Would she even know what to do in an emergency? Vortek laughed. Human medical personnel are just caregivers. They change bandages and give medicine. In a real crisis, they would probably panic like everyone else. My father says humans are emotional creatures, not logical ones. Kirael felt anger rise in her chest, but she stayed silent. She did not know enough yet to defend Nurse Yoon, but she intended to learn that afternoon. She went to the station's information center and accessed the public archives. She searched for anything she could find about humans and their history. Most of it was boring dates and names and political agreements. But then she found a section about something called the Khazarith Border Wars. 15 years ago, humans had fought against the Khazarith Dominion. The war had lasted 3 years, and the casualties had been enormous. Entire human colonies had been destroyed. Thousands of soldiers had died defending their territory. The details were classified, but the numbers alone told a story of terrible violent sacriels searched deeper. She found news articles from the war, reports of battles and sieges and desperate last stands. And then she found a name that made her breath catch in her throat. Firebase Echo. It was mentioned only briefly in the public records, a small human military outpost on a border world that had been attacked by Khazarith forces. The details were restricted, but one phrase stood out. Sole survivor recovered after 11 days. Sole survivor. One person had lived through whatever nightmare had happened at that Place Carril's. Hands trembled as she searched for more information. She found an old news image buried in an archive, and when she opened it, she felt the world tilt beneath her. The image showed a young human woman in military medical uniform. She stood in the ruins of a burned building, her face hollow and her eyes empty. She was covered in bandages, and her arm was in a sling. Behind her, rescue workers carried stretchers toward waiting ships. The caption beneath the image read, Combat Medic Yoon Seo Yin, sole survivor of Firebase Echo, following 11-day siege. 19 wounded soldiers rescued alive. Kirael stared at the image for a long time. The woman in the photograph was younger, thinner, her face marked by exhaustion and trauma, but it was unmistakably Nurse Yoon-chi had survived something terrible. She had saved 19 lives during 11 days of horror. And now she worked quietly in a school medical bay, handing out bandages and checking temperatures. While students laughed about how weak and soft humans were, Kirill returned to the medical bay that evening. She found Nurse Yoon organizing supplies, her movements calm and precise as always. Kirael, the nurse said with a warm smile. Your wing looks good. Is something wrong? I need to ask you something, Kirael said. Her voice was shaking slightly. And I need you to tell me the truth. Nurse Yoon's expression did not change, but something shifted in her eyes, a wariness, a old pain surfacing. What do you want to know? Kirael pulled out her datapad and showed the nurse the image she had found. Is this you? For a long moment, Nurse Yoon did not move. She stared at the photograph of her younger self, standing in the ashes of Firebase Echo, and her face became very still. Where did you find this? She asked quietly, in the public archives. I searched for information about the Khazarith border wars. I wanted to understand. Kirael hesitated. I saw your scars. The other night, when you were sleeping, I saw what is on your arms. And I could not stop wondering what happened to you. Nurse Yoon slowly sat down. She looked tired suddenly, as if carrying a weight that never truly left her shoulders. That was a long time ago, she said. But it was you. You were at Firebase Echo. You survived for 11 days and saved 19 people. Yes. How? Kirael asked. The Khazarith are monsters. They have claws and fangs and armor. Humans are supposed to be fragile. How did you survive? Nurse Yoon was quiet for a long moment. Then she looked at Kirael with an expression the young Velthari could not quite read. Why do you want to know? Kirael thought about the question. Because everyone says humans are weak. But those scars on your arms, those are not the marks of a weak creature. I have seen warriors from a dozen species, and none of them carry wounds like that. I want to understand what humans really are. Nurse Yoon closed her eyes. When she opened them again, there was something different there. Not the gentle nurse, but something older and harder, forged in fire and blood. I do not tell this story, she said softly. I have not spoken of it in years. But you are young, and I see fear in your eyes, Fear of the Kazareth. Fear of what might come. Perhaps it is time someone understood what happened at Firebase Echo. She reached down and slowly rolled up her sleeves. Both arms were covered in scars, burns, and bites, and claw marks and wounds that should have killed her 10 times over. These marks are a map, Nurse Yoon said. A map of 11 days in hell. If you want to know the truth, I will tell you. But I warn you, it is not a story for the faint of heart. Kira L. sat down across from the human nurse. Tell me everything. And in the quiet of the medical bay, with the stars wheeling slowly outside the windows, Nurse Yoon began to speak of the worst days of her life. Nurse Yoon stared at her scarred arms as she began to speak, her voice soft and distant, like she was reading from a book written long ago. Firebase Echo was a small outpost, she said. Just a collection of buildings on a border world called Sentinel-4. We had 37 soldiers and 3 medics, including me. Our job was to watch for Kazareth movement and report back to command. We were not supposed to be a target. We were too small, too unimportant. Kira L. listened in silence, her silver eyes fixed on the human woman. The attack came at dawn, Nurse Yoon continued. 200 Kazareth warriors against our 37. They hit us with everything they had. The first explosions killed 9 of our people before we even knew what was happening. The other 2 medics died trying to reach the wounded in the first hour. Her hand moved unconsciously to a burn scar on her left forearm. I was in the underground bunker when the main building collapsed. The fire spread so fast. I had to walk through flames to reach the survivors. That is where this came from. You walked through fire? Kira Hal whispered. The medical supplies were in the burning building. My patients needed those supplies. So yes, I walked through fire. Humans can survive things that should kill us. Our bodies are stubborn that way. We break, but we keep moving. We burn, but we do not stop. Nurse Yoon's eyes grew distant, lost in memory. By the end of the first day, 19 of our soldiers were still alive. All of them were wounded. 7 could not walk. 3 were unconscious. And I was the only medic left. What did you do? What I had to do? I gathered them in a reinforced basement beneath one of the storage buildings. It was small and dark, and the air was bad, but the Kazareth could not find us easily there. I treated wounds with whatever I could find. When proper bandages ran out, I used torn clothing. When pain medication ran out, I held their hands and talked them through the worst of it. She pointed to a series of parallel scars on her right arm, 4 deep gouges that had healed into thick ridges of tissue. On the 3rd day, a Kazareth scout found our hiding place. He came down the stairs with his claws ready to tear us apart. I had no weapon, nothing but a surgical knife. So I waited until he was close, and then I fought him with my bare hands. Karahil stared at the claw marks. You killed a Kazareth with your bare hands? I did what I had to do. He was going to kill my patients. I could not allow that. Humans are not as weak as people think. We are just small. But we have endurance and we have will. And sometimes that is enough. Nurse Yoon's voice remained calm, but her hands had begun to tremble slightly. The Kazareth knew we were there after that. They could not find exactly where we were hiding, but they searched every day. I had to move my patients twice, carrying the ones who could not walk. I set traps using medical supplies' chemical reactions that made smoke and noise to confuse them. I learned to think like a hunter, because I had to. 11 days, Kira L. said. You did this for 11 days. 11 days and 11 nights. I slept in pieces, 20 minutes at a time, always listening for footsteps. I rationed water and food until there was almost nothing left. I talked to my patients constantly, keeping them calm, keeping them focused on survival. I told them stories about Earth, about oceans and mountains and the smell of rain. I made them believe that rescue would come. She touched the bite mark near her wrist. the terrible wound that Kirael had first noticed. On the 9th day, 2 Khazrith found our hiding place. I killed the first one before he could make a sound, but the second one caught my arm in his jaws. I felt his teeth grinding against my bone. Her voice did not waver. I kept fighting. I got my knife free and I ended him. Then I bandaged my own arm with one hand while my patients watched in horror. And I told them everything was fine, that help was coming, that we just had to hold on a little longer. How? Kirael asked, her voice breaking. How did you keep going? How did you not give up? Nurse Yoon looked at her with those dark, steady eyes. Because they needed me. 19 people were depending on me to keep them alive. I could not give up because giving up meant they would die. Every time I wanted to stop, every time the pain was too much, I looked at their faces and I found the strength to keep moving. She rolled her sleeves back down, covering the scars once more. Rescue came on the 11th day. A human strike team broke through the Khazrith lines and found us. All 19 of my patients survived. Every single one of them walked out of that place alive. And you? I spent 4 months in a hospital. The doctors said it was a miracle I could still use my arms. The burns, the bites, the claw wounds, they thought I would lose function, maybe lose the limbs entirely. But I healed. Humans are very good at healing. Kirael was crying now, tears streaming down her face. Why did you become a nurse after all that? How could you go back to medicine after what you went through? Nurse Yoon reached out and gently wiped a tear from Kirael's cheek. Because that is exactly why I had to go back. I learned something in those 11 days. I learned that the most important thing in the universe is being there when someone needs you. Those 19 soldiers survived because I refused to leave them. I could not abandon medicine after that. It would have been like abandoning them. She smiled, that same gentle, kind smile she always wore. These scars do not make me strong, Kirael. The people I saved, the ones who lived because I was there, they make it worth carrying these marks. Every day I wake up and I see these scars. I remember why I kept fighting. And I know that I would do it all again if I had to. The station alarms began to blare a harsh, screaming sound that cut through the quiet of the medical bay nurse. Yoon was on her feet instantly, her entire demeanor changing. The gentle nurse vanished, replaced by something harder, something forged in 11 days of hell. What is happening? Kirael asked, fear flooding her voice. Nurse Yoon moved to the computer terminal and her face went pale. An unauthorized ship has docked at the station. Security is reporting armed intruders. Another alarm joined the first, the emergency lockdown signal. Khazrith, Nurse Yoon said quietly. The Khazrith have boarded Harmony 7. Chaos erupted throughout the station as alarms screamed and emergency lights flashed red. Students ran through corridors in panic, while teachers shouted instructions that no one could hear. Somewhere in the distance, explosions shook the wall. Skirl watched Nurse Yoon move with terrifying efficiency. The gentle woman who handed out bandages and spoke in soft tones had vanished completely. In her place stood someone else entirely, a survivor, a warrior, a human who had walked through hell and emerged unbroken. Stay close to me, Nurse Yoon commanded. We need to gather any students in this section and get them to safety. They moved into the corridor and found pandemonium. Students were running in every direction, crying and screaming. Kirael saw Vortek the Veshan pressed against the wall, all 4 of his arms wrapped around his body as he trembled with fear. Vortek! Kirael shouted. Come with us. Nurse Yoon was already moving through the crowd, her voice cutting through the chaos with calm authority. Students, come to me. Follow me to the medical bay wing. I will keep you safe. 15 students gathered around her, young aliens from a dozen different worlds, all of them terrified. Some were crying. One small Prelian student had been injured in the initial explosion. green blood seeping from a cut on her head. Nurse Yoon examined the wounded student in seconds. The cut is not deep. She will be fine. Now listen carefully. All of you, the Kazarith, have jammed communications and sealed the main exits. We cannot call for help, and we cannot reach the primary evacuation points. But there is another way. How do you know what to do? Vortek asked, his voice shaking. You are just a nurse. Nurse Yoon looked at him with eyes that held 15 years of nightmares. I have done this before. Now follow me and stay quiet. The Kazarith hunt by sound as much as sight. She led them through the medical bay and into a maintenance corridor that most students did not even know existed. The passage was narrow and dark, lit only by dim emergency lights. Nurse Yoon moved at the front, her head constantly turning, listening for any sign of danger. Kira walked beside her. Where are we going? There is an emergency shelter on the far side of this section. It is reinforced and has independent life support. If we can reach it, we can wait for rescue. A distant scream echoed through the station, followed by the unmistakable sound of weapons fire. Several students began to sob. Quiet, Nurse Yoon said firmly. I know you are afraid. I know this is the worst thing that has ever happened to you. But if you want to survive, you must be silent and you must trust me. They moved through the maintenance tunnels, stopping whenever Nurse Yoon held up her hand. She could hear things the students could not: distant footsteps, the click of Kazarith claws on metal floors. Twice she changed direction, leading them away from danger they had not even known was there. They emerged into a storage area filled with crates and equipment. Nurse Yoon began gathering supplies: chemical containers, cleaning solutions, medical tools. Kirahel watched her work with growing understanding. You are making weapons, she said. I am making distractions. The Kazarith have armor and claws. We have nothing, but their senses can be overwhelmed. Watch and learn. She mixed chemicals together and sealed them in containers. She created small devices that would produce smoke and noise when triggered. She worked with the speed of someone who had done this many times before. How did you learn all this? A young Zelkari student asked. Nurse Yoon did not look up from her work. When you spend 11 days being hunted, you learn very quickly what works and what does not. They continued through the station, moving carefully toward the emergency shelter. But as they turned a corner, Nurse Yoon suddenly pushed them all back. Her body blocking the corridor, two Kazarith warriors stood ahead, massive creatures covered in dark armor-like scales, their claws gleaming in the emergency lights. They had not seen the group yet, but they were blocking the only path forward. Stay here, Nurse Yoon whispered. Do not move. Do not make a sound. What are you going to do? Kirael asked, but Nurse Yoon was already moving. She stepped out of the shadows and walked toward the Kazarith with a calm that seemed almost impossible. The warriors saw her and laughed, a horrible clicking sound. A human, one said. The soft little creatures from the soft little world. This will be easy. Nurse Yoon did not respond. She simply kept walking toward them. The first Kazarith lunged with claws extended. What happened next was almost too fast to follow. Nurse Yoon sidestepped the attack, grabbed the warrior's arm, and used his own momentum to throw him off balance. In the same motion, she struck his throat with precise force, hitting the one spot on a Kazarith body that was not protected by natural armor. The warrior collapsed, gasping for air. Before his partner could react, Nurse Yoon had taken the fallen warrior's weapon and fired. The second Kazarith dropped, stunned but alive. The students stared in shocked silence. Vortek's jaw hung open. 3 seconds. Kirael whispered. You took down 2 Kazarith in 3 seconds. Nurse Yoon turned back to them, her expression unchanged. The throat and the backs of the knees, those are the weak points. Remember that. Now move quickly, before more come. She pressed the weapon into Vortek's trembling hands. The Deshan stared at it like it might bite him. "Watch the door," Nurse Yoon told him. "You are brave enough." "I know you are." Vortek looked at her with wide eyes. This was the human he had mocked, the fragile creature he had dismissed as weak and useless. Now she was saving his life. "How do you know?" he asked. "How do you know I am brave?" "Because you are still here," Nurse Yoon said simply. "Because when you could have run and hidden, you stayed with the group. That is courage, whether you feel brave or not." They reached the emergency shelter, but the door would not open. Through the small window, they could see other students inside, at least 30 of them, huddled together in fear. The door had been sealed from within. Nurse Yoon spoke into the intercom. "This is Nurse Yoon. I have 15 students with me. Open the door." A voice came back, trembling with fear. "We cannot. If we open the door, the Kazareth might get in. We cannot risk it. There are children out here who need shelter. I am sorry. I am so sorry. But we cannot." The sound of distant footsteps reached them, many footsteps, moving fast, coming closer. Kirahel felt her heart freeze in her chest. Nurse Yoon looked at the children behind her, 15 young aliens who had put their trust in her. Then she looked down the corridor where Kazareth forces were approaching. Her face showed no fear, no doubt, only the calm certainty of someone who had made impossible choices before. "There is another way," she said. "The ventilation system has an access point nearby. It connects to a secondary entrance to the shelter. I can get you inside from there. What about you?" Kirael asked. Nurse Yoon did not answer the question. "Kirael, I need you to lead the others through the vents." "Can you do that?" Kirael understood what the nurse was planning. "No, you cannot. Can you do that?" Tears filled Kira's eyes. "Yes," Nurse Yoon smiled, that same gentle, kind smile that had welcomed so many frightened students over the years. "Then go. I will make sure the Kazareth do not follow you." She turned and walked back down the corridor, toward the sound of approaching claws, toward the violence and darkness that she had spent 15 years trying to forget. The children watched her go, the quiet human, the gentle nurse, walking alone into the jaws of nightmare. Kirael gathered the students and led them toward the ventilation access point, just as Nurse Yoon had instructed. Her hands were shaking, but her voice was steady as she guided the frightened children one by one into the metal shaft. "Move quietly," she told them. "Stay together. Do not stop until we reach the shelter." Behind them, the sounds of combat echoed through the corridor's energy weapons firing, bodies hitting walls, the terrible clicking screams of Kazareth warriors. Kirael tried not to think about what was happening to Nurse Yoon. She tried to focus only on the task ahead. The ventilation shaft was cramped and dark. Vortek could barely fit his large frame through the narrow passages. The injured Prelian student was too weak to crawl on her own, so 2 other students carried her between them. They moved slowly, painfully, toward the secondary entrance. "What if she dies?" One student whispered. "What if the nurse dies because of us?" Kirahel felt tears sliding down her face. "She is not dying for us. She is fighting so we can live. There is a difference. Now keep moving." The sounds of battle grew fainter as they crawled deeper into the ventilation system. Then, gradually, the noise stopped entirely. An eerie silence filled the station, broken only by the hum of life support systems. They found the secondary entrance and dropped into the emergency shelter, startling the students already inside. Kirahel counted heads. All 15 had made it. Nurse Yoon had given them the chance they needed. "Where is the human?" someone asked. "Where is Nurse Yoon?" Kirael did not answer. She moved to the window and stared out into the corridor, hoping desperately to see a familiar figure walking toward them. An hour passed. Then another. The students huddled together in the shelter, not speaking, barely breathing. Every distant sound made them jump with fear. Then, finally, new sounds reached them. The thunderous roar of ships docking, the crack of security forces breaching the station. Rescue had arrived. Galactic emergency teams swept through Harmony 7, neutralizing the remaining Kazarth raiders and securing the corridors. When they finally opened the emergency shelter, Kirael was the first one out. "The nurse," she said to the nearest officer. "The human nurse, where is she?" The officer looked confused. "Human?" "We found 8 disabled Kazarth in the medical wing corridor. Someone took them all down single-handed. But we did not find—" "Take me there," Kirael demanded. "Take me to that corridor now." They found her at the far end of the medical wing, collapsed against the wall. Her clothing was torn and soaked with blood, some of it green Kazarth blood, some of it her own red human blood. A Kazarth energy blade had cut deep into her side. Claw marks covered her arms. A fresh bite wound on her shoulder oozed crimson, but she was breathing. Her eyes were open, and when she saw Kirael, she smiled. "You made it," Nurse Yoon whispered. "All of you made it. You survived," Kirael sobbed, falling to her knees beside the wounded human. "How did you survive?" Nurse Yoon's voice was weak but steady. "I told you. Humans are very good at surviving." The medical teams rushed in and began treating her injuries. Kirael watched them work, marveling at how close to death the nurse had come, and yet she had never stopped fighting, never stopped moving, until every student was safe 2 days later. Nurse Yoon woke up in the station's main medical center. Her wounds had been treated, and her condition was stable, though the doctor said she would need months of recovery. When she opened her eyes, she found a room full of visitors. All 15 students she had saved stood around her bed. Behind them were dozens more students from across the academy who had heard what she had done. Kirael sat closest, her wings folded tight against her back. Vortex stepped forward. His 4 hands were clasped together nervously. "I owe you an apology," he said. "I called humans weak. I said you were fragile and useless. I was wrong. I was so wrong." Nurse Yoon looked at him with tired but kind eyes. "Prejudice is easy to learn and hard to unlearn. You were taught to think of humans a certain way, but you are young, and you have already begun to see the truth. That takes courage." "I do not understand," Vortex said. "How did you fight so many? How did you survive wounds that should have killed you? What are humans really?" Nurse Yoon was quiet for a moment. When she spoke, her voice carried the weight of experience. "Humans come from a world that tried to kill us for millions of years. Our planet has earthquakes and hurricanes and floods. It has predators with claws and teeth much larger than ours. It has diseases and poisons and extremes of heat and cold. We should have gone extinct 1,000 times over, but we did not." She looked at each student in turn. "We survived because we refused to give up. When we fall down, we get back up. When we are hurt, we keep moving. When everything seems hopeless, we find a reason to fight. That is what humans are. We are the species that does not know how to quit." Kirael took the nurse's hand. "You could have died in that corridor. You knew you might die, and you went anyway." "Why?" Nurse Yoon squeezed her hand gently. "You asked me once why I became a nurse after surviving Firebase Echo. I told you it was because the most important thing in the universe is being there when someone needs you. That has not changed. When I saw those children trapped in the corridor, I did not think about the danger or the odds. I only thought about the faces of my patients from 15 years ago, the people who trusted me to keep them alive." Her eyes filled with tears. "Every scar I carry is a reminder of the people I saved. I would rather die covered in scars than live knowing I abandoned someone who needed me. That is the choice I made a long time ago, and I make it again every single day." The room was silent. Even the station's medical staff had stopped to listen finally. The small Prelian student, the one who had been injured during the attack, pushed through the crowd. She climbed onto the bed and wrapped her tiny arms around Nurse Yoon. "Thank you," she whispered. Thank you for saving us. One by one, the other students moved closer. They could not all embrace the wounded nurse, but they stood near her, surrounding her with their presence, their gratitude, their newfound respect. 2 months later, when Nurse Yoon returned to duty, she found that things had changed. Students no longer ignored her or laughed about humans behind her back. They greeted her by name in the corridors. They stopped by the medical bay just to say hello. They asked her questions about Earth and about her life, and on the wall outside the medical bay, a small memorial had been placed, a plaque honoring those who had protected Harmony 7 during the attack. Among the names was Yoon Seo Yeon, school nurse, but what mattered more to her was the message beneath the names. In memory of those who stood between darkness and light. 3 students, Kira L., Vortek, and the young Prelian named Tila, had enrolled in emergency medical training. When asked why, they all gave the same answer. Because someone showed us that the bravest thing you can do is be there when others need you. Nurse Yoon watched them train, and she smiled. Her body carried the scars of 2 battles, now Firebase Echo and Harmony 7. Her arms were a map of violence and survival, of impossible choices and desperate stands. But in those scars was a legacy. Not of pain, but of purpose. She had taught them the most important lesson a human could teach. That true strength is not measured in the enemies you defeat, but in the people you protect, and somewhere on a distant world called Earth. The rain was falling on green mountains and blue oceans, the soft, gentle world that had somehow raised the hardest survivors in the galaxy. They thought she was just a school nurse now. They knew better.